Before we begin, why don't we say a Hail Mary for Susan, who really started all of this. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Can you hear me okay? Yes. I don't trust this. This doesn't work too well, does it? But nevertheless, I'm loud, I think. Here's the thing. My topic today, we were told to take two saints, one from the past and one from the near, more or less our own time. So I chose St. Stanislaus, Bishop and Martyr, and St. Maximilian Kolbe. And I chose them because I'm Polish. I'm also Italian, but I'm also Polish. And I feel that the Poles don't always get a fair share of time. And so I thought, I'll take two Polish saints, because I'm sure nobody else will take them. And then, as I was working on it and thinking of what I was going to say about these two, I realized that this is going to be kind of controversial. And there will be people who will walk out during my talk because it's going to involve a little bit of politics. I didn't know that when I started. I never even dawned on me that you would think of St. Stanislaus or St. Maximilian Kolbe as being political. But here it is, and wait till you see. So I'm going to start off with this quote. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Yes. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. God will not hold us guiltless. That is the problem that we are facing today. Amen. In a big way. The church is failing to do its job. It's failing to speak out. It seems to have become very fearful. We are told that the church has no right to enter into current events or politics. Where did that come from? Who thought of that? That has nothing to do with religion or the Bible. And yet we are told that we are to keep our place. You will notice that the First Amendment provides that Congress make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting its free exercise. Those are the words. And right after that it says, it protects freedom of speech, the press, assembly, and the right to petition the government. Those two things are put together. Freedom of religion and freedom of speech. The early church, the early founders of our country, the founding fathers, understood that if we were going to have a free country, we needed free speech. And if we're going to have free speech, no one can be limited in that speech. No one. Did you ever think of that? Mm-hmm. In the 1960s, President Lyndon Johnson did something terrible, and I don't understand why the Supreme Court has never done anything about it. I understand that Mr. Trump, when he was president, did start to do something about it. And maybe things will work out. But what did Mr. Johnson do? He said that certain groups were limited in their free speech. Religion, schools, and charities. If a college professor from Harvard gets up in Harvard and says, I disagree with what the government is doing, Harvard loses its free tax status. If a priest gets up in the pulpit and says, I think this is what should be done, the church loses its free tax status. If a worker for the Red Cross gets up and says, I think the government is failing in this, it could lose its free tax status. effectively, Mr. Johnson, the Democratic Party, has limited free speech in this country in a big way. Oftentimes you hear about the church speaking out and people say, they should lose their tax-free status. The church is evil. They forget. This law also includes intellectuals and people who are working with charity, universities and schools. If you're a high school teacher, you have lost your free speech. Well, I'll tell you something. I'm a priest, and I am not going to give up my free speech, and I am not speaking for the church. I'm speaking as an American, period. And you don't like it? It's been nice knowing you. Brings me to St. Stanislaus. St. Stanislaus is a very interesting person. He lived in the 1000s, and obviously he came from Poland, and he was very well educated. He began in the cathedral school of Gniezno. Gniezno is one of the first capitals of Poland. It means nest, by the way. Gniezno means nest. Why is that? Because the founder, or the mythical founder of Poland, came to Gniezno. He saw a white eagle in a nest and tried to capture that eagle. And so he named it the nest. This was where he settled, the nest. And so that was the first capital of Poland. Then from there, the capital moved to Krakow, and then it moved to Warsaw. At any rate, Stanislaus was educated in the cathedral school of Gniezno, which was a normal thing, but a good thing, and an unusual thing, because the schools were not that commonplace. And then he went to the University of Paris, no less, and there he received a very good education. And when he came back, he was in the Diocese of Krakow, which became the capital of Poland, and he was known as a very good preacher. He was a very good speaker, and he eventually was named as the Bishop of Krakow. Now, he was very influential in this position as bishop. Poland at that time had all sorts of political problems, and one of them was that the king wasn't really recognized as a king. He was recognized as a Grand Duke. And so when Stanislaus came into power as bishop, he influenced the surrounding countries and Poland itself, and so they named the man who was in power as king, King Bolesław. So he put him in power by manipulating things in government. Ooh, a clergyman involved in government. This is not looking too good, is it? At any rate. So Stanislaus and Bolesław had to be close. He was the bishop and the prime bishop, and Bolesław was the king. So they worked together. There was a problem though. Bolesław was an alley cat. You know what that means? He didn't behave himself, and he wasn't setting a good example, and he was annoying a lot of the ladies in a big way. I'm being gentle in what I'm saying, and I think that most of you are over the hill here, and you know what I'm talking about, okay? So Bolesław was that kind of a person, and Stanislaus did not approve because it was his job to teach and to lead people to Jesus so that they would all eventually end up in heaven, right? By the way, That's the job of the church. Sometimes people think that the job of the church is charity. It's not. It's interesting to note that the Roman Catholic Church is the largest charitable organization in the world. No government, no other institution can compare to the charitable works that the Roman Catholic Church does, from education to dealing with the poor, homeless, whatever it is, wherever there's a problem, the church is there trying to help things out. No government, no other group can say that. But that's not the job of the church. That's a byproduct, that's a sideline that happens because the main job of the church is to get you and me from here to eternity. That's it. Remember, again, you're all over the hill, so you should remember your Baltimore Catechism, right? First question, why did God create us? God created us to know Him, love Him, and serve Him here on earth so that someday we could rejoice with Him forever in heaven. Amen. Remember that? By the way, I just want you to know so that you can admire me even further than because Martha has been canonizing me. And when I was in elementary school, I went to a Polish parochial school run by the Felician Sisters. Did anybody know the Felician Sisters? There was a Polish order. And we had to learn our Baltimore Catechism by heart in Polish and in English. So I should know it backwards and forwards, huh? But at any rate, so that is why God created us, to know Him, love Him, and serve Him here on earth so as to be happy with Him forever and ever. And that is the job of the church. That was the job that St. Stanislaus took very seriously. And when he noticed the king misbehaving and jeopardizing his eternal future, he spoke with him, and he spoke very strongly to him. Bolesław took it okay at first. He didn't like it. He was a proud man, but he accepted it. But there was something about the fact that this bishop was criticizing him, and he was now the king. He resented it. And so he decided to do something unpleasant to the bishop. The bishop had just bought a big piece of property to build a church, and the man who sold the property died. And the family, under the influence of the king, decided that they hadn't been paid. But Stanislaus said, yes, I did pay him. Peter was the man who owned the property, and he had paid Peter for the property, fair and square. Bolesław took the side of the family, or rather influenced the family to take a side against the bishop. They did things like this in the old days. They do things like that today. And so what happened was, the king said, you're going to have to pay these people. And Stanislaus says, no, I've already paid them. We don't have any more money. We paid for that property. And the king said, prove it. And he said, I will get a witness. And so Stanislaus says, give me 3 days. In 3 days, I will have a witness. So, Stanislaus went to the cemetery, and he began praying at the grave of Peter. 3 days later, Stanislaus left the cemetery, and someone was with him. He went to the king and the family, and who do you think it was? It was dead Peter. Peter was with him. The family was at it, and of course, the king accepted the testimony of the dead man, and so Stanislaus was free. He was okay. He didn't have to pay again. And then he asked Peter, he says, Peter, do you want to stay with us or do you want to go back? And what do you think Peter said? I want to go back. And so they brought him back to the grave and he went back. We presume he was in heaven at that point. At any rate, things were okay, more or less, but the king was still a bit randy. And he was involved in a little bit of a war, and it was an unjust war, and he was involved again with some of the ladies, and not by their own will. You get the picture? Things were not nice. Things were not going well. And so Stanislaus had to come out and speak again. Why did he have to speak? First of all, because Bolesław was his part of his flock, and because Bolesław was the king, and the king's example was very powerful. And sometimes we don't realize this, but a person in authority, if they are going to be setting a bad example or doing things that are negative, they cause far more problems, not only for the nation, but for the immortal souls of the nation. And so Stanislaus realized he had a very difficult problem there, because it wasn't only the king's soul that he was concerned about, but the souls of the people. And so he had to do something. He could not be silent, because his silence would be contributing to the problem. And so he spoke to the king. The king ignored him. He spoke to the king again. The king ignored him. And so he spoke publicly to the king. The king became angry and did nothing, did not change his way. And so finally Stanislaus excommunicated him. He excommunicated him. He could not receive the sacraments until he reformed his way. Now, it would be a wonderful story if I could say Bolesław at this point repented and came to Stanislaus and made a good confession. He did not. He did not. He ordered his soldiers to kill Stanislaus. The soldiers came. There was a little church just outside of Kraków where Stanislaus was saying Mass. The soldiers came and they stopped. They came back to the king and said, "We could not go in." Stanislaus was protected by a divine light, and we were afraid. Bolesław said, well, I won't say what he said because he said some very nasty things, and there were a lot of four-letter words involved. But he then went to the church. Stanislaus was just finishing Mass. Bolesław walked in bold as brass, took his sword out, and killed him. And then he cut his body up into pieces and threw it out into the field, figuring the animals will take care of the remains and there'll be no evidence. What happened next was 4 white eagles came and they protected the body pieces of St. Stanislaus until the monks came and gathered them up and put them into a proper coffin. The people rose up. Bolesław was thrown out. His son had to take over. Bolesław was ended up as a servant in a Franciscan monastery in Hungary for the rest of his life. So he did do penance. That's the good news. He did do penance, and he did reform his life as a servant in this monastery in Hungary. And you can, if you go to Hungary, you can see this church, and there is a big plaque there indicating that this is where the King of Poland was a servant to the Franciscan monks in that place. So Stanislaus spoke out against a terrible evil that involved one man and his soul, but also because he was the leader of the country, it affected the whole country. And the example that he was setting was very bad, but it ended out okay, and Stanislaus became a great hero. He is buried now. No, he's not buried. He's in a silver casket, a huge silver casket, which is way over the altar in the cathedral of Krakow, and it's called the altar of the nation, the altar of the homeland. Interesting note, when Hitler conquered Poland at the beginning of World War II, he did go to the Wawel Cathedral, but he was afraid to go in because he had the superstitious fear of St. Stanislaus. He wouldn't go in. But St. Stanislaus spoke up for freedom, for what is right, what is pure, what is good, what is holy, so that the example would be set for heaven. Now, do you see a resemblance to what is going on in our country today? I was horrified by the fact that the bishops had talked about excommunicating President Biden. Because, according to canon law, Mr. Biden has excommunicated himself. Okay? You do not need a wonderful ceremony. Have you ever seen that movie about Thomas à Becket? And they have that wonderful scene of excommunication of the king. And in it, the monks come in with these big candles, and when he pronounces the words of excommunication publicly, they blow out the candles and throw them on the floor and break them. And thus, the king is excommunicated. Well, that didn't happen with Mr. Biden because he excommunicated himself by fostering and encouraging abortions. We don't realize this maybe, but we should if we have been taught properly that abortion is one of the more serious sins. It cries to heaven for vengeance. Whoa, that's pretty strong language. And if you have an abortion, and anyone who helps you to have an abortion, and anyone who encourages an abortion or makes it possible, you then automatically excommunicate yourself. And you cannot receive Holy Communion. And so there was this, if you remember, I know at our age we have a tendency to forget things, but if you remember at all, there was this big discussion and argument with the bishops and the like, saying that, oh no, we can't get involved with politics. Oh no, this isn't our place. We don't want to bring politics into religion. Oh no. Excuse me, to remain silent is to contribute to the sin. And this is what they were doing. They refused to take action. Now, there were some priests and bishops who did say that if Mr. Biden came to them for communion, they would refuse. But I think it was only like 2 or 3. But the bishops themselves have said nothing. And in fact, it was said that Mr. Biden is a devout Catholic. Excuse me, he has set a terrible example. He has fostered laws in a big way that encourages abortion. And to the point that even a botched abortion, the baby is delivered alive, has to simply be put in a tray and ignored until it dies. This is what is happening. This is what the party is saying. And this is what they are fostering. And our bishops have said nothing. Our bishops have said nothing. Where is St. Stanislaus when you need him? St. Stanislaus would have stood up at this point and said, no, this cannot go on because it is setting a bad example for the people. It is providing an opportunity for a terrible sin, a major sin, to prosper. And it's going to get worse because his vice president is encouraging the same thing, only on a bigger scale. Wow. And where are our bishops? They are saying nothing because they don't want to get involved in politics because they feel that politics are a bad thing for the church to be involved in. I have some, well, we should all have some problems with that. There is a book here called Letter to the American Church. And it's written by a Lutheran. And it talks about the churches, the Lutheran Church, the Catholic Church, and the other Protestant churches in Germany before World War II. And his thesis is that the bishops, the churches, could have prevented World War II, could have prevented Adolf Hitler. But they did nothing because they did not think that it was proper for religion and politics to mix. So they said nothing, they did nothing. One or two clergymen did speak out before World War II. One or two clergymen did speak out against Hitler. They were put in concentration camps. But everybody else was silent. So he talks about that in this book, and I just want to read you a few sections of the book. If I can find it, yes I can. If we do not speak out at the injustices we see around us, to what thin-lipped gospel do we think we are leading anyone? If we believe our own government is looking the other way at certain injustices while boldly making a show of being heroically concerned with others, are we not obliged to point this out? Our responsibilities as Christians go beyond mere evangelism, that is spreading the gospel. We pretend we would have spoken out for the Jews during World War II, or that we would have spoken out against the slave trade during the Civil War. But are we speaking out today on the issues that are so no less important to God in our time? If not, we are deceiving ourselves, but God is not deceived. On what issues are we ourselves being silent, and for what reason? The unborn are being murdered and their body parts sold for profit. Are we not to mention this for fear of driving away someone from God? Or do we ourselves not quite believe it or wish to believe it? That's a very powerful statement. Yeah, we think, oh, during World War II, we would have spoken out for the Jews in Auschwitz. Oh, no, we would never allow such a thing to happen. Oh, Lord, no. But those bishops did. Those bishops at the beginning of World War II had an opportunity to speak out against Hitler, and they did not. A lot of clergy had an opportunity to speak out against slavery here in the United States before the Civil War, but they did not. Because they felt, oh no, if we get involved with politics, then how are we going to share the gospel? Excuse me, that is the gospel. Fighting against injustice is the gospel. The only difference between the German church of that time is that we have been able to see what happens when the church does not do what God calls it to do. We have the example of the German church in that day as a warning. Therefore, if we do not rise to the occasion now and do what God asks of us, shall we wonder whose sin is greater? We are in the same position as the church was in Germany before World War II. Only I think even greater, because it is so subtle and so acceptable. If we say anything against certain political individuals today, oh, what are we doing? We're talking politics. We can't do that. Well, excuse me, we better do that, because otherwise we are going to have to answer for it in eternity. If we do not speak, we are not being neutral. We are contributing to the success of the thing you refuse to name and condemn. That is something that St. Stanislaus did not do. He spoke. He had to pay the price, but he spoke, and he ended up with eternity. We are not speaking. Our bishops are not speaking. Our clergy are not speaking because we're afraid of politics, and we're afraid that we're going to offend someone. Excuse me. Look at the people who are running the country today. Are they doing the things that a good Christian should be concerned about? Are they following Jesus Christ, or are they following some idea of a wonderful world that does not exist? When these politicians announced their attitude about abortion, the crowd of women cheered. Wow, is that a frightening thing or what? That women who have the privilege and honor and glory of giving birth cheered for dead babies, for the possibility of killing babies. So we have a problem, and the problem is that we, the clergy, are not doing our job. We, the clergy, are being silent. We, the clergy, are too afraid. Now we go to St. Maximilian Kolbe. You think it's going to get any better? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I think that the fact that we have heroes like St. Stanislaus who spoke out against the authority that exists, the evilness that exists, is a wonderful thing. St. Maximilian Kolbe was born on January 8, 1894, and when he was a young boy, probably around 12 or so, his mother had one time scolded him and said, "What am I to do with you? You're going to be lost. You don't behave, and you're always fooling around. You know." Well, he was being a kid. He was being a young boy, but. And his mother had about had it. And so poor Maximilian, by the way, his baptismal name was Raymond. His religious name was Maximilian. So poor little Raymond went and sat in his room alone and began to think about all of this. And later that day, he actually had gone to church because he really, really felt badly at what his mother had told him. You know, sometimes when we scold children, we have to be careful that we're not too strong, because it really does affect. So it did affect poor little Maximilian Kolbe. And he went to the church, and he was there praying, and he had a vision. He had a vision of the Blessed Mother. And the Blessed Mother encouraged him to do the right thing. And then she said, "I have a gift for you. I have a crown. A white crown or a red crown. The white crown is that you will be a teacher, that you will be leading people to Jesus, and the red crown is that you will be a martyr, and that way you will lead people to Jesus." And little Maximilian, little Raymond at that time, said, "I want both. I want both." Well, how typical of a child. not to be satisfied with one. He took both of them. And as it turned out, he did get both crowns in the end. Well, he joined at the age of 13, actually. I'm sorry. He had that little vision. And then later on, he went off with his brother to join the Franciscans. He had to sneak there because at that point, Poland, this was before World War I, at that point, Poland was still partitioned. And so it was cut into sections. And so they had to cross from one political area to the other political area to go to the seminary, which they did. They actually had to sneak through and cut through the border illegally to get to the other part of Poland that was under possession by Austria. And so they joined the seminary there. Turned out that Maximilian was very smart, and he did very well in school, and so was his brother, and the two of them were sent to Rome to study, and they received a very good education, and then he was ordained a priest and completed his studies, and at that point, World War I had ended, and Poland was a free nation again. After 200 years of enslavement, Poland was a free nation. And so it was 1919. And he began to do what he could, and he realized there was a problem. People did not know the faith. People did not know the faith. Do you think that we have that problem today? Yes, we do. Yes, we do. I assure you, we have a big problem in that people don't know the faith. People who are going to daily mass don't know the faith. People who don't come to church at all don't know the faith. They know nothing about Christianity. They know nothing about Jesus Christ. And what are we doing about it? What are we, the clergy, doing about it? I'll tell you what we're doing about it. Nothing. We're not doing anything. Shame on us. Shame on us. We're not doing anything. If you think we have a problem with political matters, we have a problem with our own evangelization. We are not sharing what Jesus Christ wants us to share. St. Maximilian had an idea. He had an idea that if they could print magazines or books or newspapers and just get it out to the people, it would help. His brothers, the Franciscan brothers, the monks, thought that that was crazy. And when he would talk about this, they would think, oh, Maxie's gone a little bit overboard. He thinks that if we just, print up some newspapers, we're going to make a difference. Well, one day, at the monastery, they had a visitor from America. And he was a priest. And they were having recreation, which means for a bunch of old monks, you sit around in the parlor and you chat. And this is what they were doing. And the visitor from America was there. And one of the brothers, who was probably not one of the nicer ones, said, "Father," from America, talking to the American bishop, "wait till you hear the crazy idea that Brother Maximilian has. Tell him, Brother Maximilian, tell him what you want to do." And they thought this was a hoot. They were going to have a good laugh. St. Maximilian got up and he explained what he wanted to do. He wanted to get a printing press. He wanted to print a little newspaper or something that would come out every month that he would give out to people, and that it would explain the faith in ordinary language. It wouldn't be a big theological thing. It would be something where they thought it was a big joke. The American priest got up and said, "I think that's a wonderful idea." And he opened his wallet, being a rich American priest, and gave St. Maximilian Kolbe a $100 bill. $100 bill. Where was that priest from? Chicopee, Massachusetts. Right here. He was from our diocese of Springfield, Chicopee, Massachusetts. I'm so proud of him. With that money, $100 in those days, I mean, this was 1920s, it was like $1 million. So he bought a printing press and all of the equipment that goes with it, and he started to print a little newspaper. And what happened? That work attracted other men. Vocations started to come. And the monks thought, we can't have this, it's too noisy, that printing press, and all of these new vocations, you have to go someplace else. So St. Maximilian Kolbe got a property from a nobleman, an aristocrat in Warsaw, just outside of Warsaw, and he called it the City of the Immaculata, in Polish, Niepokalanów, that this was going to be where they were going to print their newspapers. He put up a statue. The first thing he did was put up a statue of the Blessed Mother, and they would have devotions there in the field. The aristocrat said, this is very nice, I'm glad that you're here, this property was doing nothing, but you haven't paid me for it yet. And St. Maximilian Kolbe said, well, I don't have any money. And says, well, then you're going to have to leave. This is, And so he started to pack me. And the nobleman said, well, what about the statue of the Blessed Mother? And he says, Maximilian goes, well, you can have it. We'll leave it here. And the nobleman looked at him and says, you can't do that. You can't do that. This belongs to the Blessed Mother. You better keep it. And so he gave him the property, just like that. And Maximilian built literally a city. How many vocations did he have in that little monastery? Are you ready for this? Over 700. Wow. Imagine that one priest attracted over 700 vocations. It was the largest monastic organization in the world. In the world. If a priest today could say, oh, I have 4 or 5 vocations to my credit. Wow, that's impressive. But St. Maximilian Kolbe at one point had over 700. And they oftentimes had photographs of these men in their robes, in their Franciscan robes, working on these big printing presses. They eventually were printing the largest publication in Europe. The largest daily publication in Europe. They were printing children's magazines and adult magazines, not adult as in dirty, but for mature audiences, for older people, and children's magazines and so on. And they were, it was amazing. And at one point, St. Maximilian decided he would go to Japan and do the same thing there. And he went to, of all places, Nagasaki. What is Nagasaki famous for? Atomic bomb. Okay? The unfortunate thing was, he could only find a piece of property that wasn't one of the best ones. It was on the side of a hill or mountain kind of thing, and it was, but he established there the Garden of the Immaculata, it was called. And he set up the same kind of a program there. And then, just before World War II began, he had to go back to Poland. He had tuberculosis. He had to go back to Poland. Jumping ahead just a little bit, when they did drop the atomic bomb on Nagasaki, one of the few buildings that was untouched was the Garden of the Immaculata. It was protected by that hill, that mountain, and nobody was hurt there. And the buildings were preserved there. So the Blessed Mother had her finger in that. At any rate, St. Maximilian went back to Poland, and World War II began. The Nazis invaded Poland, overran. Their first order was to eliminate the intelligentsia, the leadership, and the clergy. And so St. Maximilian Kolbe fit in both areas. He was a member of the intelligentsia, and he was a member of the clergy. And he was taken to prison in Warsaw, where he was tortured, and then for some reason he was released. After about a month, he was released, but he knew that that wasn't going to last, but he went back to Niepokalanów. In the meantime, Niepokalanów became a hiding place for over 1,500 Jews were hiding in Niepokalanów with the monks. And eventually, and of course, they were limited in their publications that they had. Under the Nazis. The Nazis did not approve of religion, did not approve the Catholic Church, and so they were limited. You have to understand that the first prisoners at Auschwitz were the professors of the Jagiellonian University, the biggest and oldest university in Poland. The first prisoners were all the professors. They were called in for a special meeting at the beginning of September, and they thought that they were going to reopen the school, the college, and they were all loaded into trucks and brought to Auschwitz. So the professors were the first prisoners, and then were the priests. So the clergy were picked up in various places. The biggest concentration camp for the clergy was Dachau. And it was a place where they did medical experiments on the priests. And Hitler bragged that he had built the largest monastery in the modern world, Dachau, because it had a few thousand priests at that point. I think they eventually had something like 25,000 priests in that concentration camp. Interestingly enough, one of the pastors of my parish, Our Lady of Częstochowa, was a former inmate at Dachau. And I have since known a number of priests. They have since passed on, but I did know a number of priests who were from Dachau. And just a side note, when the Allies were coming in, the Nazis realized that they were doomed and they had to get rid of the evidence. And so they were going to kill everyone in the camp. And before the Allies got there, the prisoners, the priests, knew this was going to happen. They knew the Allies were coming. They knew the Nazis' plan. So they started a novena to St. Joseph of Kalisz. There's a shrine in Poland, the Holy Family of Kalisz, and St. Joseph is the head of the family. So they made a prayer, a novena to him. They were praying intensely that the Allies would somehow come in time. And as it happened, not only did they come in time, they came so quickly that the Nazis were completely shocked and not ready for them, and they did not put into action the murder of all of the prisoners as they had planned. And what's very interesting is that from that day, at the end of the war, every year on that day, there was a procession and a big mass of former prisoners. And they would march into the church with their uniforms, the striped uniforms with their numbers, that they had engraved on or tattooed on their wrists. And every year they would make a pilgrimage to that shrine for that event. If you go to Our Lady of Częstochowa Church in Turner's Falls, you will find on the side altar of the Blessed Mother, there is a painting, an icon with metal coverings on it, just as it is in Poland, of the Holy Family of Kalisz with St. Joseph there. So you could make a little pilgrimage there this week, and you'll see at the altar on the side wall the picture of the Holy Family of Kalisz. At any rate, so the Nazis started to do their terrible work. For the birthday of Hitler, the SS, as a gift, destroyed all the churches and shrines, wayside shrines and everything, in the western part of Poland as a gift to Hitler. Hitler was overjoyed at that. And most of the clergy were imprisoned in concentration camps. Those that were left behind, that were not imprisoned, were usually what the Nazis considered ordinary. I would have been left behind. I would have been saved. You see, your mental, the lack of your mental ability sometimes is an advantage. But at any rate, so they, at this point, Maximilian Kolbe was taken prisoner again, and he was brought to Auschwitz. Now, people think that Auschwitz was primarily for the Jews. Yes and no. A major part of the population there was Jewish, but there was also a major part of the population that was not. As I told you, the first prisoners there were the professors of the Jagiellonian University. And so there was a great mixture of people there. And they simply worked them to death in many cases, as well as putting them into the gas chambers. And so St. Maximilian Kolbe was doing a great deal of work there, carrying heavy stones for something that they wanted to have built. And he was singled out constantly because he was a priest. And the particular commandant in that area seemed to have it in for Maximilian, and he oftentimes did terrible things to him. At one point, there is a, what do you call it, a breakout. Some of the prisoners escape, and so the custom was, if one person escapes, 10 people have to be put to death. And so they lined up everybody, and they announced it, someone has escaped, and if they don't return by sunset, 10 of you will die. So they had to stand outside at attention for the whole day. At the end of the day, the commandant came back, 10 people were picked. One of them, his name was Gajewniczek, cried out, he said, "But my family, my wife, my children." And St. Maximilian Kolbe understood what the problem was. He knew Mr. Gajewniczek had a family, and without him, what would they do? So even though they were in prison, he was important to them. So St. Maximilian stepped forward and said, "Take me in his place." And to the shock of everyone, the commandant simply said, "Okay." And so he was taken. This is how they were being put to death. I visited this place. It's kind of spooky, to say the least. It's in the basement of one of the blocks. It's down in the basement. It's a little cell, not very big, maybe like from here to there. The 10 men were put in there, and the only piece of furniture was a bucket. The bucket was their bathroom. That was it. No food, no water. And so usually the men would go through this, they would start to go mad, and they would start screaming and yelling and cursing and the like. But something different happened. St. Maximilian would stand in the center of them. They would pray, and they would sing hymns. And it was a very joyful place, to the point where the Nazi guards refused to go near it. And they would send the Polish prisoners to check on them and to empty the bucket. Well, excuse me, after a few days, the bucket was not emptied because they were so thirsty. They were drinking what was in the bucket. And eventually even that was not available. And so after about 10 days, many of the men had died, but I think 2 or 3 of them were left, and St. Maximilian was one of them. And they came in and they injected them with poison and killed them that way, and then their bodies were thrown into the furnace, and they were destroyed in that way. I went down to that, I did pay a visit to Auschwitz, and I saw that area where St. Maximilian Kolbe died, and I have to say that I found it spooky. I found it very uncomfortable. At the end of that hallway, though, was a small room, a closet, the size of a telephone booth. And that was a special place reserved for individuals who couldn't even sit down. They had to stand because it was such a small room. But they had a mirror there set up for us, for the tourists or pilgrims, and on the back side of the door frame, one of the prisoners with his fingernail had scratched in the most beautiful image of the Sacred Heart. A beautiful, loving image of the Sacred Heart. That was their last prayer, carving that image with his fingernail in the doorframe. And you can still see it there today, the Sacred Heart in there. So there was an immense and wonderful faith. So, we have two saints, one at this end, one at this end. St. Maximilian Kolbe had to fight the politicians of the day, the Nazis. The Nazis took over. The Nazis had complete power, and their job was to eliminate the church completely. Do we have that happening here today? How very strange, by the way, that when some men were going to be chosen as federal judges, a certain person, who is now the vice president, investigated them and questioned them and found that they were members of the Knights of Columbus. She was horrified. You're members of the Knights of Columbus. Do you know what they do? They fight against abortion. They support the Catholic Church. And she was listing all of these wonderful things that the Knights of Columbus do as a terrible thing, and she wanted them removed from even being considered for the federal judgeship. Fortunately, hers was not the only vote that had to take place, but her questioning was so frightening to find out that she was so anti-Catholic. There are several other things that she had done in that area too. But that was what was happening with the Nazis and St. Maximilian Kolbe. The church was being, before the war, it was being dismantled, it was being persecuted, and then once the war came out, in Poland especially, it was being destroyed. Hitler's plan was to destroy the church in the rest of the world too. And he had plans for the Vatican, he had plans for the bishops in his country, he had plans for the church in other areas too. He was very clever though, in that he realized he could only do this in certain areas of the world without causing problems with his power structure, you see. In Germany, the Archbishop of, I think it was the Archbishop of Cologne, was very strong and outspoken. And Hitler himself, it's recorded, said that we can't do anything right now because the people would rise up in support of him. But as soon as the war is over, that man is going to be done. He is finished. Yeah, that was the whole idea. So we are in that position today because in Germany in those days, they did not think that that would happen. They did not imagine, they could not imagine the government being so vindictive, being so ugly, being so frightening, being so cruel. And yet it was. And it was. And interesting enough, before World War II, many in the church supported the government because they thought, oh, look at what wonderful things are happening in Germany. The economy is growing. We're doing beautiful things. The streets are clean. The houses are nice. The prices are good. This is what we want. Excuse me. This may be what you want, but is it what we need? What we need is goodness, purity, holiness, faith, love, charity, truth. Those are the things that we need. We don't need these other things. We think we do. And this is what's happening in our country today. So, St. Stanislaus spoke out. He had to die for it. We're not speaking out today because we're afraid of ruffling feathers. We're not afraid to die. That's not going to happen to us. No. We're afraid we're not going to be looked at kindly. We're afraid we might lose our tax dollars. We're afraid to contribute our voice where it's necessary. We are afraid to use our constitutionally given free speech. And we're afraid of people like you. If I came out and started to talk as I'm doing now, I'm surprised that you haven't started throwing your water bottles at me. Because I know that some of you don't agree with me. But this is fact. This is a historical fact that St. Stanislaus had to do this, that we are ignoring doing this, that it was ignored during before World War II. These things were ignored. It is a fact that we today are not preaching the gospel in every possible way. We are ignoring our responsibility. We are called by Jesus to go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. That is known as the Great Commission, which Jesus gave to the church before ascending into heaven. Are we doing that? Are we preaching the gospel to all creation? No, we're not, because we're afraid to offend people. We're afraid to offend people. Oh no, everybody is good the way they are. No, they're not. Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. I am the only way to the Father. Whoa! But I thought that everybody went to heaven. I thought that everybody was good. I thought that all religions were nice. I thought that, excuse me, what does the Bible say? It's only one way, His way. And we're ignoring that today. We have had less impact on the world today than we have had in the whole history of Western civilization. And we seem to be just fine with that. Well, excuse me, we're going to have to pay the price. If not in this life, in the next life. So, thank you for letting me come. Thank you for listening to me so politely. Thank you for this opportunity to preach the gospel. Thank you for this opportunity to insult you for your political beliefs. But nevertheless, that's what we're called to do, and we better do it. You disagree with that? Tough bananas. Because we are called to do God's work, and God's work sometimes is not very popular. And we have problems in this country, and we're not going to solve them if we don't look carefully at what those people in power are doing. If we don't look carefully and speak out against what those people in power are doing. If we sit back and accept that, then we are contributing to it. In the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, amen.